All right, everybody, welcome to the Strategy Sherpa Show. And I have a great guest today. You're in store for a special show here. We have Howard Scott Warshaw in the room today. And I had to make sure I said that correctly because if I didn't, Howard would have separated War and Shaw for me and made sure I said it correctly. Howard, welcome to the show. I just have so much to say right at first, but I want to welcome you first.
Well, David, thank you. It's really great to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
On the Strategy Sherpa Show, what we do is we talk about failures in business, and I actually got this idea from one of my clients, and he was talking to me, and he said, Dave, one of the best things about you is you make me process my failures, and he said, and you're really good at it, and he said you should start a radio show that you talk about entrepreneurs' failures because I did a podcast where he was in the indoor plant business, right? Growing indoor farms, actually indoor farms, and his business failed. And he got invited on a panel for an association group, indoor farming association group. And that panel was the most watched podcast that they ever did by 3 times. And so he said, this is a really powerful thing that you do, and it's really powerful the way you talk about it. So why don't you start this show? So I did, and it's been
That's
a blessing.
excellent.
Been doing it for a year now, and had a lot of really great guests. And Vern Harnish, the guy who wrote Scaling Up, who we're associated with, came in and did like the second or third show with me, and he actually owned that he named Scaling Up wrong, and for 20 years it cost him a lot, right? And but he is much like yourself because you wrote a book, and it is let's see, you wrote the book name. I got to look up the
Oh,
book
I
name.
think
Maybe
it's
you can
called
tell.
Once Upon a Atari, as a matter of fact.
Once Upon a Atari. Okay.
How I
And
Made History by Killing an Industry. How's that for a failure?
that's right. But then I wanted to go on to they made a whole movie about your failure.
They did.
So
Hollywood actually made a movie. It was so magnanimous, so intense. And I have to point out one thing I love is irony, and the irony of achieving success through a show about failure is delicious. So I just want to say that congratulations. I think that's fabulous. And I do consider myself an authority on failure, not just experientially, because of course I've had many, but helping people learn and grow from their mistakes. Because what I always like to say is, you know, we benefit from our successes, but we learn from our mistakes and failures, or we don't.
and I like the inflection change, or we don't, right? And that is so true. And I loved when I read a blog that you wrote, or an article, I'd probably call it an article, that you posted on LinkedIn about failure. And you made that quote inside there. And as soon as I read it, I just started laughing, or you don't. Because how many times in my life where I went off into la la land and I didn't learn what I needed to learn right then. And then when I went back and did the reflection, I actually gained a lot of value from the mistake. So I loved how you
Yeah,
made that comment.
it's when we don't learn from our failures, we are doomed to repeat them for sure. All it is trying. It's the universe trying to make us pay attention to the lesson, and we'll keep failing until we learn. And the great thing about learning is now you get to fail in a new way, and you get a new lesson.
Yeah.
That's sort of the way I look at moving forward.
And I love how you just said that too, because I'm getting up there in age and I still make mistakes. And sometimes I sit there and shake my head and just go, you even knew better on this one and you still did it. Because sometimes your brain just makes you do something that you didn't really want to do.
Well,
And you did.
sometimes we have dubious motives also.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll accept that also. So tell us a little bit about your background because I think that that's really important for the audience to understand because everyone that watches the show may not know who you are because I did not know who you are but I'm telling you, I'm very fortunate to have been introduced to you. And so I would like you to share with what you've been doing, like where you started your career.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I mean, who am I? That question has haunted me all my life. I'm still trying to answer it. But the way I like to put it is I'm the most famous person you've never heard of. In that I have done things, I have put things out in the world. Most people have actually come into contact with my work at some point or another. They just don't know it. And so I'm currently a psychotherapist in California, Silicon Valley, where I specialize in the issues of high-tech leaders and the super intelligent. The way I like to phrase it, though, is really I'm bilingual, right? I speak both English and nerd, and I can translate between the two. So I work a lot with high-tech people and those trying to love them, which can be challenging at times. But I arrived here at a very long and winding road because I've had many careers. I'm a award-winning documentary filmmaker. I'm a MoMA artist. Some of my work is in the Museum of Modern Art. That was a great bucket item. But the exciting part of my journey really started when I started making video games for Atari. I made some video games. I made some of their most famous and some of their most infamous video games. But the one game I'm mostly known for, my greatest failure so far, is the E.T. video game. I did the video game for the E.T. project that is reputed to have destroyed the entire video game industry in the early 80s. That was quite a yoke to carry for many years. But I've learned to assimilate, accommodate, and deal with it. I've tried to harvest the lessons. And the beautiful thing about that failure is it was so huge, it is still paying dividends in terms of lessons.
Well, I just want to congratulate you because it's still paying dividends after all these years. How old were you when you made that mistake?
I was 25 years old, and the cover of my book, I mean, I could just show you the book right here. Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. I'm right there. That's me at the age of, this is actually me on my 25th birthday. The cover photo.
What happened to all the hair? You were right out of the 70s right there.
Oh, I was right out of the 70s. The 70s were fun. The 80s were wild, and the 90s were kind of a blur. I'm still working on the new century.
24 years in, you're still working.
But my hair decided to take a break of its own because I've gone through many careers and my hair took a few detours also, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I think that happens to you, but it's funny, my stylist tells me I'm never gonna go bald, but I can't grow a beard for the life of me. So I'm always a little jealous.
I like to think of it, it's gravity. Gravity pulls everything down, so all the hair up here can start to come out here, I think is what went on. It's a horrible inversion.
Showing your wisdom. All right. Well, I appreciate it. So you worked with Atari. Then what? Where did you go after that? So you built their best video game and their worst. What was the best?
Right. So the first game that I did was a game called Yar's Revenge, which I not only invented the game, I created the idea of a backstory. I did a lot of groundbreaking work with Yar's Revenge. I showed up at Atari and my goal was to make a splash. I wanted to do something no one had ever seen or thought of before. And there are a number of things in Yar's that were new that became industry standards. Full screen explosions, death sequences, elaborate soundscapes, and Easter eggs, a marketing approved Easter egg. All of these things were things that I developed in Yar's Revenge. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. It was very intense, and it got tremendous notoriety. And it is Atari's best-selling original video game. And then I did E.T., and E.T. was really known as a disaster. But one of the main issues with E.T. was, whereas usually a video game takes 6 or more months to make, the E.T. game was actually done and completed in 5 weeks because that was all the time that I had. So they came around and they had took so much time to negotiate this game, the biggest license, the most expensive license to date in video game history at that point. And they only left 5 weeks for the development if they were going to make it to the Christmas market, which they felt they must make it to the Christmas market. So they came to development. They came to the the head of development of video games and said, hey, we need this game. We got 5 weeks. And he told them, no way. We're not going to do that. We're not, you can't do it. You can't do a game in 5 weeks. And the CEO of the company, after hearing that from my boss's boss, called me directly in my office and said, hey, Howard, we need the ET game for September 1st. And this was July 27th. And I said, he goes, can you do it? And I said, absolutely, I can, provided we reach the right arrangement. And because I don't know what I was full of at that point, but whatever it was, I was overflowing with it. I was just super confident that I could make that happen. And I was at a place in my life, I had put out 2 successful games so far, and I was looking for a challenge. And I think a lot, you know what I like to say is some of the greatest successes and some of the most horrible disasters always begin with someone saying yes. That's where it starts. And I was looking for a challenge, a mountain to climb, something impossible. And what I got was exactly what I asked for. You know, say, be careful what you wish for. I need this challenge, and here it is, this impossible mountain to climb. And I said, yes, that's for me.
And you were full of it at that time, right?
Oh yeah, I had hubris coming out of my pockets. You know, it was just, I felt there was nothing I couldn't do. And and what was funny was I didn't know anybody had already refused it or passed it off. And there's a very funny scene that happened in an apartment meeting a few days into the project. There were some amazing moments in this project. There was a lot of grinding and grueling effort, but there were some amazing moments. One of them was at the department meeting when they announced this. I had just finished doing Raiders of the Lost Ark with Steven Spielberg, which was the first movie conversion to a video game. And so we had a department meeting a few days into the project where it was announced that Howard's going to do the ET game. And everybody goes like, oh, how come Howard gets to do all the games? It wasn't all the games. This was only the second one. But everybody's like, oh, Howard gets to do it. So there was some grumbling. And I stood up in the meeting and I said, hey, I said, this game is due September 1st. Anybody who wants it, raise your hand. You can have it. Crickets.
No one.
Not a word. I never heard another word of, oh, how come Howard gets to do these games? What I did hear was, Howard's insane trying to do this game, but nobody else wanted it. No one else would touch it.
Yeah. So were your eyes brown at that time?
They were getting browner, I'll tell you that. And then they started to char a little bit as things really got tense.
So you take on this impossible task of getting this done in 5 weeks. I mean, that must have put a little stress on you, and I'm sure you had some good long days at that time too, huh?
I had nothing but long days. I actually had a development system moved into my home so that I was never more than 2 minutes away from modifying the code. The only time I wasn't right near a development station was when I was driving between work and home. And I was still coding in my head, and that was dangerous also.
How old were you at that time?
25.
Oh, this is okay. You're 25 when you're building this game.
Oh yeah. This game, the third day into this schedule was my 25th birthday.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, Howard, this is a live radio show, and what we got to do is we got to take a break. We're going to take a break. This is the Strategy Sherpa Show. We'll be back with Howard Scott Warshaw right after this, and we'll talk a little bit more about his Atari experience. We'll be right back after these messages. All right, Howard, we're back. This is the Strategy Sherpa Show, and I'm here with Howard Scott Warshaw, and he's got his book right behind him. Show us your book again, Howard, just to make sure that everybody sees it, because from what I've heard, I have not had a chance to read it yet, but one of my colleagues has, and he says it's one of the best failure books he's ever read. So
I know. I hope it to be another failure-based success. That's always the goal.
That's exactly how he said it to me when he told me about the book.
Excellent. And it's, who doesn't love a good postmortem? And this was one of the, I do a very thorough analysis of one of the great questions is what happened to the video game industry. Atari was like Kleenex. They were omnipresent everywhere in the early 80s and they disappeared. It
Yep.
just went away. How does something like that happen? I mean, my background, before I went into computers, I got degrees in economics and statistics and theater. And I've since become a clinical psychologist. So a business guy, a tech guy, a psychologist, or a psychotherapist, and a humorist. I have to throw that because that's very important to me. Because if it isn't fun, it's not worth engaging.
I don't.
And I brought all that to bring a really full analysis of what really went on that killed the industry. Because the title is ironic because I love irony.
Yeah,
And
I don't want to date. I don't want to date myself too much, but I remember playing Atari, the original Atari, when I was a kid. So
excellent, excellent. Well, you may have come into contact with my games before.
oh,
So that's just
when you said everybody, a lot of people have come in contact with you. When I first learned about you and read some of your bio and information, I was like going, I played these games before. So I was actually going, I know this guy's work is pretty interesting. I never played ET though. I never got into ET that much. So
no problem. I forgive you. No, nobody
well,
needs
thank
to
you.
play ET, but it means a lot to me when I find out that people have played my games because to have been a part of other people's lives, that's always been very important to me. That's the beauty of
Uh-huh.
making video games is when you make a video
Sure.
game and it goes out in the world, you're touching other people's lives. You're providing entertainment. I always saw it this way. I always looked at it as a broadcast medium that you're putting something out, touching people's lives, giving them a break from their day-to-day existence and creating a fun, engaging experience. That to me is like the best thing you can do as a human being. So video games was very gratifying on that level. And being a psychotherapist sort of takes that to a whole nother level.
Yeah, and also with the video games, I'm sure the psychotherapist does, but with the video games, one of the interesting things is like you were at the time when like Steve Jobs and Microsoft's coming on. You were in the mix of all that, and that.
Steve Jobs was at Apple. Apple's first building was right next to our building. In fact, we stole their sign one day as a prank. There was some wacky stuff that went on there. It
Uh-huh.
was an intensely creative environment. Uh, if you really want to innovate, if you want to be a creator and you want to innovate, you better be good friends with failure because you've got to fail your way into success, right? You have to, there's so many blind alleys, so many places you can't get to. And as a creator, as a technology creator, there's, when you're just trying to make up a joke or write a show or something, if it's not working, you get that it's a failure and that's the way it is. And I can punch it up. I can do something to pick it up. When you're doing technology, when you're doing state-of-the-art technology, when you have a failure, there's a question that haunts you. And that question is this too much to ask of the hardware? Is it not possible? Or am I not clever enough to get the hardware to come through and pull this out? And the video game systems back in that day constantly put you in that dilemma. They forced you to face that issue. There's so much more came out of that machine than the designers of the machine ever anticipated. And that's because they created an open system that's a complex system. And whenever you have a complex system, nobody knows all the implications and all the nooks and crannies and ins and outs. They have to be learned and teased and discovered and happened upon. So when you're failing, you're getting information, right? Failure is it's creating new information. As long as you don't keep doing the same mistake over and over again.
I've done that a few times in my life, honestly. And it's never good when I do because you realize you're in this failures right in the middle of them. You're just going, I put myself right back here again. But I love, like, I'm going back to that article and I wanted to quote a few things that you put in there because I was, man, your article just hit me like a ton of bricks in a great way. I was like I'm gonna recommend people read this. Failure is not what happened. The happenings of life are neither successes nor failures. They are merely circumstances.
That's true. Uh, it's true. Events are circumstances. They're just things that happen. Failure is an interpretation we put on something, just like success. That's why you have people who aren't really doing very well who will tell you they're a tremendous success. And you will have people who are amazing contributors who walk around feeling like failures, right? That can happen because
Mhm.
success or failure is an interpretation. I don't think deciding whether what I did was a failure or not is very important in the scope of life. If you look at life, so I have a saying about life. I say that life is the process of turning the future into the present. The past only comes in when we drag it. Right? And so we, if you look at, I look at past events as okay. I don't spend a lot of time looking backwards. But what I do is I look forwards. What do I want to do? I choose goals. I choose, things I aspire to. Then I look backwards for help. I look
Yeah,
backwards for information. I want to know what have I learned from where I've been that's going to make my next step a closer step to my next goal.
no,
Because if
that's
I'm thinking, if I'm paying attention, that's always there. My next step can always either be a random step or a step backwards, or I can take a step forward towards my goal. And how do I know if I'm getting closer to my goal? Well, if I'm clear about my goal and I'm clear about where I am and what I'm doing, then I know the direction I want to go. Then I look back and I say, is there anything going on there that have I tried to take this step before and it didn't work? What have I learned? How am I going to take that step better this time?
right. Right. And I love how you're saying that because when you're trying to accomplish a goal, there's enough things working against you. You can't work against yourself. Right. And so I love how you're saying
So
that.
true.
And one of the things I say to people often is that I can't do anything about yesterday, but I can do a lot about tomorrow. Right. And so I try not to get stuck in yesterday.
Excellent. See, the way I look at this, our in life, we go through life with I call an energy pool. We have a certain amount of energy, and it's our job to allocate this energy. That's all life is. And every moment of every day of my whole life, I have a certain amount of energy, sometimes more, sometimes less, and I am allocating that energy. And there's only three places I ever put this energy. I put it in the future, I put it in the present, or I put it in the past. Now, there are productive and unproductive ways of placing that energy. Putting my energy in the future. Productive ways to do that is planning, laying a basis, accumulating resources that are appropriate to my next step, to my next goal. Inappropriate or wasteful ways of spending about the future is worry, anxiety, things like that. It costs you the energy.
Right.
Anxiety is an amazing thing. The irony of anxiety is how can something that literally weighs nothing be such a heavy burden? And so,
I love that. I gotta get that in a quote. Because it's I have a colleague I work with, and she worries about stuff that hasn't happened yet quite often. And one of the things I say to her all the time is like, you don't even know what's going to happen yet. How can you be so worried about what you think is going to happen, right? Like why don't you wait for the thing to happen and then, but if you know that there's a chance that that can happen, why don't you try to do things to maybe make it not happen?
well, there's
So.
two kinds of people in the world, right? People who divide the world into two kinds of people and people who don't. No, there's one. I like two kinds of people. I have lots of versions of two kinds of people. But two kinds of people is there's people who don't want to get too excited because they want to forego more disappointment later. And there's people who want to go ahead and get enthusiastic about something because if it doesn't work, you're going to have a long time to regret it and you'll never have the opportunity to be excited about it. So these are different outlooks on life. These are different kinds of people. I've never been a don't get excited kind of guy. And I'll tell you why for two reasons. One is when you're worried and really anxietized over the future, you're not just wasting energy on the anxiety. You are casting a negative pall on your goals and what's going on. That's an extra barrier for you to fight through. And like you said before, and I think you're so right, the person we have to battle most is ourselves in a lot of cases.
Oh, most definitely.
When you're enthusiastic, you not only create energy instead of losing energy, but it's sort of like lighting a lantern when you're in a cave. It gives you an extra focus and goal and enthusiasm, and that enthusiasm can draw new possibilities out from stuff you ordinarily wouldn't have even looked at. When I'm really focused, I suddenly find solutions that weren't available to me before. That kind of synergy, that kind of energy synergy, that's the difference in a lot of cases between people who succeed and people who can't quite reach their goals.
Yeah, you probably work with a lot of high power Silicon executives, and my guess is that they're coming to you because they're realizing they're living in the negative, right? And they need to get back to that um, because they've had that success before, and somewhere along the way they lost it, or that positive edge. Because I've lost it in my life a couple of times, and so it's really important to go and talk to somebody about these things if you're stuck. And I think that that's the beauty of what you're doing. Hey, Howard, I hate to do this, but it's time for that break again. So we have to do these every 13 minutes, but let's come back and do the last segment, and then we'll wrap it up and share some more of your wisdom with everyone. This is a Strategy Sherpa show, and I'm here with Howard Scott Warshaw. I want to make sure I say that right. I got that correct again. So, and we'll be right back after these messages. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Strategy Sherpa Show, and I'm here with Howard Scott Warshaw, and we are talking about failure. And Howard, you've already shared so much of your wisdom with the audience. It's pretty amazing. What are some of the things you see that, like when people come to you, sometimes we don't know we're stuck. Let's start there. Sometimes we don't know we're stuck, right? We don't have consciousness of it. People around us are probably trying to say to us like something's a matter or you're not yourself. These are common language that you may hear around you. But how do you realize you're stuck? Like, how do I know that it's time to go and see Howard?
That's an incredibly astute comment, David. I really think because uh, failure is seen as an active thing. It's something you do. A lot of times we never really perceive ourselves as failing to activate, right? So one way I like to think of it is sometimes people are afraid of a new challenge. You know, you want to go in a new direction, but there's fear, and of course there's fear. There's always a little hump to get over.
Nope.
So people tend to focus on the fear. They think of what could go wrong. What are the problems? What's interesting is they don't try to look at what are the problems of not moving. What if I stay here? What's the cost? What's the opportunity cost of staying here? What if I don't do it? People don't tend to think that way, but it's a really important way to balance. Like when people come to me and they say, oh, I'm so down on this is never going to work stuff. And what I do is I don't tell them banish the negative thoughts. I always think that's kind of silly. People are going to have doubts. They're going to have negative thoughts. What I tell them is you don't need to erase negative thoughts. Then you're spending all your energy not doing something. What I tell them is when you feel a negative thought, first recognize it. Recognize that it's just a negative thought. It's not an actuality. And the other thing is now balance it. If you can make up a scenario that doesn't work in the future, I'll bet you can make up a scenario that does work. And I want you to give that equal time. So that's what it's about, balance. It's not about negating. It's about balancing the negative with the positive to remember that negative is one possible outcome. It is not the only outcome. And stagnation is a guarantee.
Yeah. When you were talking, something flashed before my eyes, and I was thinking back to the time that I started my first business after college. I've started my first one when I was in high school, but it was after college, and I had worked for Arthur Anderson for a number of years, and I was deciding whether I was gonna do my own CPA firm or not. And one of the things I did is I went back through and I asked myself this one question. What's the worst thing that can happen to me if I fail at this business? And what I came down to is I'd have to go work back to work at Arthur Anderson, which wasn't really that bad. So, and I was sitting there and I'm laughing at myself because I was pretty stressed out for about a week when I started thinking about it. And after I had that conversation with myself, it freed me. And I can tell you a lot of entrepreneurs have come to me and talked to me about starting a business, and they're worried about it. And I'd ask them the same question. And I maybe even send them off to do the pros and cons, right? And they come back and they go, all these cons don't matter. Almost every single time they go, these are not consequential to my life at all. They may impact me if I do something really bad, but that this is none of these are really that bad. And
They're
and
not.
so
People exaggerate the negative in a lot of cases. It's an easy thing to do. There's a lot of things that influence us to do it. It takes some courage. It takes some courage to let go of social programming that may have told you, don't do that. This is dangerous. You've got to play it safe. You've got to be careful. Most people who succeed, that's not what they're hearing in their head. If you're really afraid of what's going to happen if I try that, like I said before, why aren't you afraid of what happens if you don't? Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. There's always going to be value in that next step if you're prepared to harvest it.
yeah. No,
Right?
you have a quote. You have a quote. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. You were making a point. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like we talked before about, ways you can put energy productively into the future. In the past, ways we can waste energy on the past is regret, remorse, vindictive feelings, things like that. But there's productive ways by reviewing and what I call harvesting, going back and not ruining or regretting what happened, but seriously just looking at it and saying, what could I have done better? Where did I go wrong? How can I avoid this again? Or how can I take something that worked and put that to work for me again? Utilize
Yeah.
some of the issues from the past. But failure, what I like to say is failure is not an end. Failure is a launching point. It's a starting place. If you're never failing, what are you learning? Are you growing?
Yeah. Yeah. And you have a quote in here in the article that I was referring to on LinkedIn that you posted, and say again, we enjoy our successes, but we grow from our failures, or we don't.
Or we don't. Right. No one is obligated to benefit from a failure. It's just an opportunity. And any entrepreneur is going to know that, opportunity is everywhere. There's always opportunities to succeed and to fail. That's the world is rife with those. But do you have the vision and the awareness to pick one out that can work and operate it and move with it and flow with it? That's right. The name of the game. These opportunities are available to everyone. They're just sitting there. But being an entrepreneur, sometimes we think of it as you've got to have that magic idea and know just how to run it all the way through. I don't think of it that way. I think you've got to have the vision, the wide open vision, and the lack of restricted mind to be openness to be able to look around and get, oh, that is an opportunity. I see this thing here. Yeah. One way that I like to put it is it's the difference between curiosity and judgment, right? A lot of people sit in judgment, and judgment is a great way to pretend I've dealt with something without actually taking any responsibility for it. If I see a situation, that was horrible. I really did a bad thing. I smacked myself on the hand. I put myself in the corner, and then I'll turn around tomorrow and do exactly the same thing. That's useless. I've judged myself. I've said what a bad thing it is, but
you became a victim in that.
Exactly. Exactly. Which I don't think really serves anyone. If we stay curious, the analogy I like to use, let's say you're really hungry and you want a hot dog. And so you go down the street and there's a Chinese place, and here's a burger joint, and here's some Italian food. And I go through this whole town and all these places, and I don't have a hot dog, and I'm still hungry. And I could go, man, what happened? This sucks. I can't get a thing to eat. That's judgment. I need everything to match my expectation. If I go down the road saying, I'm hungry, what's there to eat? Suddenly I have many choices and many opportunities, and it's a feast at that point. When we're in curiosity, we're open to possibilities, and we've opened the whole world to can serve us. When we're in judgment, we're taking the whole world and either saying it's in or it's out, and we're eliminating potential solutions. So many entrepreneurs fail because they think they have to succeed in a certain way, and they reject potential solutions that don't match their idea of what success is supposed to be. If I just go around the world saying, will this work? What's this here? What's this here? Can that help me? Can this move me forward? I think you get a lot more done.
Well, I got asked a question not too long ago by a colleague. They asked me if my business was growing the way I wanted it to. And I thought about the question for a second, and after thinking about it for a second, I said back to him, well, I really don't know how to answer that question because I didn't paint this firm picture of where I needed to be. I just defined what I wanted to do and what I'm passionate about. And am I doing that? Yes. Is it everything working out the way I want it to? No, but I've done 6 businesses and none of them worked out. I wanted them to.
When things go the way we want them to, we can get complacent. Yes. And there's a thing I like to say that's when you're feeling too comfortable and you're expecting things just to keep going this way, I say sometimes life kicks us out of a comfortable bed so we don't miss an appointment with destiny. Sometimes we need to get knocked off our course to find the better way, right? We don't find the shortcut if we stay on the main road.
Yeah. Yep.
And of course, we can get lost when we get off the main road, and that's what everybody's afraid of. But getting lost, you might find the next development. You might find the next thing too. Can you really go wrong if you're really open to what's happening there? A lot of people would say, yes, you can go horribly wrong. It could be a tragedy. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of good there too.
You most definitely, and that's I think that. Because I do define successes sometimes, and when I do that, I'm usually disappointed in some way. I still do it though, even though I know I probably shouldn't because I don't get consciousness fast enough. But as soon as I do, I try to correct that in my brain. But all good things have to come to an end, Howard. And I have to tell you that I've really enjoyed this conversation, but I want to leave the audience with something, one of the last things you say in this article, because when I read it, I almost started crying because I go, this is like such a powerful message that people need to hear this often. And it's life is a series of successive approximations. When I invest the effort to learn from my failures, my every next step is improved, and my life's path converges on satisfaction and happiness. Wow.
I believe that's true.
I believe that's true too. And that's why I'm even getting emotional just reading it again, because I think I've missed this at points in my life, and I'm not disappointed in myself, but I'm sure glad that I understand this now, right? Because it's one of those things when you start to understand this, you start to forgive yourself for all these other things that you think were important. It's funny. I was sharing with a friend of mine. They were in high school. That their daughters in high school, and I was sharing that high school seems so important, and it's really just not.
It's not. No, there's one thing I'd like to say, if I may, and that is that sometimes we look at things that we think are failures, but please remember that you don't really know where you are until you see where it takes you. And that one piece of advice, if I could give one piece of advice to people, this would be it. It's that don't judge things where you think are failures too quickly or too harshly, because sometimes when you stumble and fall, you end up dodging a bullet. You need to wait to find out where this mess is going to take you before you realize if it was something that was really ruining where you were trying to go or saving you from a real problem and opening a new path. And that, I think, is a very important perspective to bring.
Yeah, and with that, I'm going to close this off because I don't know a better way to end the show than with that comment. Howard Scott Warshaw, thank you very much for coming in today and being a part of the show. I really appreciate it, and I hope at some point I get a chance to meet you. I'll be in Silicon Valley speaking to a group of CEOs here soon, and I will let you know when I'm there, and hopefully we can get together and have a coffee or something. I'd really welcome that.
Please do. I'd love that. My only regret is that I feel I've failed to cover failure as adequately as we could, but anytime you want to talk, let me know. I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, so did I, and I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people will get a lot of value out of it. This is a Strategy Sherpa show, and we'll be right back after these messages. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, David.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I just had my conversation with Howard, and boy, what a great conversation. I think his knowledge of failure, you the guy had a movie made about his failure. Gosh, man, that must have been a blow to your ego on that one. That must have thrown him for a loop. But at the same time, look at where he's at now, and when you're talking to somebody, you could just tell whether they're happy in their life or not. And he is definitely happy guy, and understands what he's trying to do. And boy, just a great conversation, a great show for all of us to think about, and to think about how we're thinking about failure and where we're spending our time worrying and creating anxiety for ourselves with the unknown. How do I paint the picture of where I'm going in a positive light, or I can sit back and look at all the things that are going to go wrong and never really do anything in my life? It's really a great was great conversation around that. But I wanted to share a few things with you about Assured Strategy and what we're up to right now. We did a financial forecast webinar this last Wednesday. It was the first webinar I've done since COVID. I had a lot of fun doing it. We had about 100 people register, about 40 people showed up, and it was a really good session. And we have another one coming up this next week, and it's Scaling Up Your Cash Reserves. It's on August at 8 from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. That would be 11 a.m. on Pacific, and it would be at 2 p.m. on the Eastern Time. And then on the 22nd, we have Unlock Your Potentials, the Psychology of Accountability and SMART Goals. And Kane Pekovic, my partner, is going to be doing that one. On September the 12th, we have another webinar, Transforming Dreaded Meetings into Productive Powerhouses. Ted Servata, the guy I did the coach I did the financial projection workshop, is going to be doing that. And then Ted and I will be in Denver, Colorado on September 17th from 8 to 5 p.m. We'll be doing a Scaling Up workshop. And Scaling Up workshops, you may have never even heard of Scaling Up. It's off the book by Vern Harnish. And Ted and I are both Scaling Up coaches. We've been Scaling Up coaches for about 15 years now. And so we're some of the most tenured Scaling Up coaches out there. And we're both going to be together at this workshop, giving people an overview of Scaling Up and how to get it into your company, and then giving you some actionable tools you can take away from that workshop. So we're looking forward to that. But let's go back to a little the conversation we did today, because I want to point out Howard's article. The article is Failure, the Misunderstood Gift, and it's by Howard Scott Warshaw. And he is the Silicon Valley therapist. That's the name of his company too. I love how he branded himself that, because he's in the Silicon Valley and he helps nerdy people, he said. I love that too, because a lot of people can relate to that. One of the things he put in this article, and I just want to close the show with this, mistakes are mandatory. That's what our show is based on, is like a lot of business leaders go into decisions thinking it's the best decision in the world, and then mistakes start happening. So his thing is, in life, mistakes are mandatory. Learning is optional. Another great quote. So you can make mistakes and decide you're not going to learn from them, or you can make mistakes and really gain value from them. That's what we're trying to do on the Strategy Sherpa show. And when I read this article, I was just really impressed. And I hope you'll get on and you'll make a comment like I did, because this has had a lot of reposts and a lot of views, and it's probably one of the most powerful articles I've ever read on failure. So take a look at it. It resonated with me quite a bit, and hopefully it resonates with you. And reach out to Howard and tell him thank you for joining the show if you get a chance. This is a Strategy Sherpa show, and we're signing off. Take care. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.